So we are live. I'm just waiting for my screen to show that we are live and I can follow the comments. Synchronizing. So we are on screen. So nearly there. Have it. Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to the third day of the Grand Multiliteracy event. This is the second session of the day and we're going to be talking about how to teach our children to read or write in a language that has deep orthography. That means that it's not very transparent. Some letters can have different sounds, some or a combination of letters make a different sound. So it's not always very transparent. And we're going to talk about English as an example. There are other languages like French that have this challenge when we teach our children. So we're going to talk about it with Weronika Ozpolat. The reason I wanted Weronika to be with us today is for several reasons, but she's a speech and language therapist specializing in bilingualism, autism, and the early years. And she's also a home educator, and so she home educates her 5 children. And that was a very interesting point for me because it means that you're the person in charge of this. It's a big responsibility, but because of your background, you're able to do it, I guess not always in a similar way as in school. And I would like to discuss your choices as well, how you're doing it and why you're doing that way. Maybe if there are things that people carry on doing in school that you think maybe we should change, all these things. So I hope it's going to be a very interesting conversation. For the people who are following us live, don't hesitate to ask your questions. I'm keeping an eye on my phone, so I'll be able to read your questions to Weronika. So welcome, Weronika.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here today.
Thank you. And before we carry on, do you want to explain a bit more about yourself? Is there anything else that I have missed that you would like people to know about?
Yeah, you've covered everything really. Yeah, I think what is different about me maybe to some of your other speakers is I am not trained to be a teacher. So I'm not trained to teach children in the same way that you might typically be teaching a child at school. I do teach children in a sense of I do speech and language therapy. So I'm very used to organizing activities and setting up things for children and helping them learn. But I don't teach my children in a traditional way that you would typically see in the classroom. So yeah, I have lots of different ideas that will probably go against what a lot of primary school teachers do in the classroom when they're teaching 4 and 5-year-olds how to learn to read. And I think one of the main reasons that I am homeschooling actually is that so I can teach my kids in the way that they want to learn, in the way that suits them best.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that's why as well I wanted to have you to have your input on this topic. So maybe you can dive straight into this. But so how are you teaching your children? When we talk about literacy, yeah, and sorry, just for the people who don't know Weronika, she's based in England, so that's why she's passing on English. So what's different? You said there are differences and you wanted to homeschool children to make your own choices. Can you talk to us about some of these choices?
Yeah, so in schools in the UK, children start school at the age of 4, and they immediately start learning phonics and how to read and write in English. But I do believe that children should not be starting so young. I do think it's better to wait a little bit longer. So I don't normally start teaching my children till about the age of 5, the letters. And then maybe that is a very slow process. I'm not someone who really rushes into it. I just do a slow process of teaching them all the different letters and the sounds that go with the letters. And then once they know the whole alphabet, then I go into I'll show you some books that I've got at the moment.
Yeah.
But what I think it's really important to realize is that research shows that whether children learn to read at the age of 5 or the age of 7, actually they're at the same level by the age of 11. So everyone comes up to the same level by, you know, the end of primary school. And I think that's quite important, because a lot of people think, you know, it's really good to teach your kids to read as soon as possible. You know, I see programs out there where they say, teach your toddler to read. And there's really not much point, I don't think. So I would say, you know, it's very much about going with your child's ability. You do get some children who obviously are very capable and they want to learn. They have, like,
Yeah,
you
it
know, an
depends on
innate
the child. Yeah.
ability, right? But I would say the age of 4 is way too young, and it shouldn't be a rush, you know, because we have our whole lives ahead of us to learn. So yeah, this is what I do. I start by teaching them the alphabet, you know, so and that phonics will come into that. So in the UK, they use a system called systematic synthetic phonics. And phonics is at the bit that is phonics, that is actually the grapheme phoneme correspondence. So showing children that a letter represents a sound. And obviously in English, sometimes we can have 3 letters that represent one sound, so it's quite different. But that is what grapheme phoneme correspondence is. And then systematic synthetic phonics is the specific program that they use in schools to teach phonics. Okay, so when I talk about phonics and when I talk about systematic synthetic phonics, they're not exactly the same thing. Yeah. So phonics is teaching the grapheme phoneme correspondence, which is very important actually. But what I would say is there are actually research shows that there was a study by Compton et al. In 2014. It showed that 10 to 15% of children struggle to learn to read through phonics. And unfortunately, in school, there's only one method. They only teach systematic synthetic phonics, and they don't do another method. So those 10 to 15% of children are going to be struggling. And I think the good thing about homeschooling is you can try out different methods and see what works for your child. Okay, so what I tend to do, I use, so after I've taught them the alphabet, we will then move on to these books. I don't know whether you've seen them
So
before.
can I just clarify one point? When you
Yeah.
say to teach the alphabet, do you teach them the sounds of the letters, or do you teach them this is A, B, C?
Yeah, so I teach them the sounds of the letters. I think that's
Yeah,
really,
okay.
really important. Yeah, because when you're learning to read and to write, you're not going to be sounding it out A, B, C, are you? You have to,
Yeah,
in order to blend sounds together, you have to know the sound.
yeah,
So yeah, but actually, even before I teach them the alphabet, we do phonological awareness.
yeah,
So phonological awareness is all about the ability to hear sounds in the word and know that a word starts with a certain sound and be able to pick out the different sounds. And it's really important for segmenting the word into different sound and blending together again. So
yeah.
phonological awareness is actually a key pre-literacy skill, actually, before you even start doing the grapheme phoneme correspondence with the letters. So I might, for example, get a selection of objects, you know, little tiny objects, and I'll say to, I'll maybe hold up like a cat, you know, and I'll say to my child, cat, what sound does that start with? Cat, you know? And then I'll hold up a different one. Dinosaur. What does dinosaur start with? What does spoon start with? You know, and this is a really good way to get them thinking about sounds even before they start learning to read. So there's a lot of pre-literacy skills. There's 6 pre-literacy skills actually that you need to learn before you're ready to learn to read and write. So phonological awareness, we do quite a lot about that, thinking about words and the different sounds that are in words. Then we move on to learning the sounds for the letters of the alphabet, and then we move on to these keyword books, Peter and Jane. Have you come across these before?
No. What can we see inside what they look like?
Yeah. So there's 12 different levels. This is just some I picked up. This is level 4. But inside you will see. Can we see this? Yeah. So there's a
Yeah.
picture. I think it's backwards, isn't it? Is it like?
No, it's fine.
Can you see it? Can you see it fine? Okay,
Yeah.
great. So we've got the lovely picture, and we've got some words on the page, and at the bottom there's a little box that says new words. So on every page
Yeah.
there may be some new words, and it will show you right away at the bottom which are the new words on the page. But because those are the only 2 new words, the child should be able to read all of the other words because
Okay.
they would have come across
Yes.
it in the
So
previous
it's
book. Okay.
progressive.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
progressive. And this is more the whole word approach rather than systematic synthetic phonics. But this is actually what I learned to read with when I was younger. And I've been using this with all of my children. I'm now using it with my fourth child. And I just find it a really good way for them to learn to read. So this is my preferred method, really, these books. So there are 12 different levels. There's 3 different books per level. So there's 4A, 4B, 4C. 4A and 4B are pretty much the same as this. So it's just like a reading book. And then 4C introduces some of the phonic knowledge. So as you can see here, we're then getting into a bit of the phonics there. So it's about asking the child to, say this sound with these different endings, really look at the different endings, say this sound with all the different endings. So it's looking at phonological awareness, it's looking at rhyme, it's looking at the different sounds, different endings. So yeah, I quite like these books, really. Here we go. It's a little bit different on each page, but this introduces you really to the phonics and all the different sounds and things like that. So this is my preferred method. But as I said, I don't think that one method is the best. I think different methods work for different children. I really like this method. It's worked well for me. It's worked well for my kids. And I prefer it over the systematic synthetic phonics that they do use in schools. There's another really interesting method as well. I can tell you about.
Can I just ask for clarification about what the whole word approach and systematic synthetic methods are?
Yeah. So with the systematic synthetic phonics, it's all about learning about the sounds, and each sound represents each letter represents a sound, and then you have those digraphs, where 2 letters represent the sound and things like that, and you have to learn the endings and things. With the whole word approach, it's not like you need to learn all of that at the beginning. You can kind of learn it as you go along. So once you know just the alphabet sounds, then you can move on to this, and you can kind of, you come across the word light, L-I-G-H-T, but I don't need to teach them right at the beginning before they start reading that. I can just, they come across it
they
by
find
reading.
it in context.
They find it in context, and then they can look at the whole word and learn the whole word rather than having to sound out all the letters. Sometimes I think the problem with the systematic synthetic phonics is it teaches children to sound out every single letter, and that can be quite problematic with English because, things like light, L-I-G-H-T, they then start to say licht, or, for was, W-A-S, they say was, and things like that. So I think phonics can be a bit problematic when you start saying, hang on, I know that you've learned this rule, but actually these words go against the rule. Do you see what I mean? So the whole word approach you don't come across this obstacle. You learn the word correctly from the start, and that's what I quite like about it.
So it's a bit a mix of both, then that
it's a mix.
We don't need to be extreme and follow just one method. It needs to depend on the words, and it needs to depend on the child as well.
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in following the child. So if you're trying to use a method with your child and they're not getting on with that method, you need to try different methods and find out one that works for your child.
Okay, thank you. And so just before you mentioned a research that said about 10 to 15 children struggle with phonics. Can you explain a bit more? So what do they struggle with, and or why do they struggle? What doesn't work in that method?
I think it's some children just prefer different approaches. So the whole word approach, some children may be more visual, and they may be able to look at words as a whole, and that works for them better than sounding out. They might struggle maybe with phonological awareness and things like that. And so quite often it will be children with special educational needs who are struggling with some of these methods. And what you need to be doing is working on the skills that they are struggling with. Okay, so try different approaches, but also try and support them to build up the skills that they're struggling with. Phonological awareness is a big one. If children do not have that understanding about rhyme and sound and segmenting words, blending the sounds together, then they're going to really struggle to learn to read. And a different approach you know, rather than the phonics one might be a bit better for them. Like the whole word approach might be a bit better for those children, but there are other approaches as well out there. So actually, before children learn to read, there are 6 skills actually that they need to acquire.
Yeah.
So the first one is speech and language skills. This is very, very important, because if children do not know language, what is the point in reading? You know, reading is all about writing, and reading is all about conveying meaning. Okay, so we're reading in order to get some meaning from the text, in order to understand something, in order to learn about something, in order to, you know, enjoy ourselves. If they're just reading and they don't understand that language, they're not getting anything out of reading, so there's really no point. Okay, so language skills are extremely important pre-literacy skills. And what we're finding in the UK is an increasing number of children are actually starting school without the ability to, without those fundamental speech and language skills. Okay, so they're going to be struggling. They're 4 years old, they have a language delay, they have a speech delay, they go into school, they're expected to start learning to read, but they actually can't because they don't have these fundamental skills. Speech as well. Speech is all about the sounds that we make and the way that we speak. So if a child is struggling, for example, and mixing up sounds, like they might say a t instead of a k, so cat, they will say it's tat, right? They might then struggle with the reading and writing because they're thinking of a cat, but they say tat, so they might write t-atta instead of k-atta. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So speech sounds are really important, a good knowledge of speech sounds. Then there's also metalinguistic awareness. That's very important. The ability to know how to manipulate language, phonological awareness, as I said. Motor skills, they're also really important. So even something as simple as being sitting upright on a chair, okay, this takes your brain power. Okay, if a child is struggling with their core and they're not able to sit up, and they're just really, their brain is working on trying to get them not to fall over, they're not going to be then listening and concentrating in the classroom. And also very important motor skill is the ability to cross the midline. Okay, because when we read, we scan the page from left to right, and we have to be able to cross the midline. So that's kind of motor skills that we need. Another thing is print awareness. You know, print awareness. We need to know that the shapes on the page, the letters on the page, are representing meaning and sound. Okay, that's all about print awareness. And then symbolic representation as well is another important thing that children need to be aware of. So the understanding that those symbols on the page are representing sounds. So there's lots and lots of pre-literacy skills that children need to be able to know. They need to have learned these skills before they're ready to read and write.
Yeah. Okay. And so one comment we got from Uta is that, so it's important to remember as well that in each country, there are going to be different ways or different methods of teaching children to read. So right now we're talking mainly about English because it in terms of opacity of the language, it's quite extreme compared to French, for example, or other languages. Yeah, but like you said, it's good to know about different methods and see what works best, or where we're going to take from one method or another. And so could you take us through, so you talked about the different pre-literacy skills. Could you take us through that from when a child doesn't know how to read to maybe when they start to be able to decipher the first words? What are, maybe with some examples of activities you could be doing? For example, for phonological awareness, what kind of activities do you do, etc.?
Yeah, so you know, like the one I said before, get some little objects that represent different sound, you know, that they start with different sounds, and get children picking up the objects that, you know, and saying what sound it starts with. And then you can also say what sound is in the middle, what sound is at the end. So the word cat, what sound do you hear at the beginning, what sound do you hear in the middle, what sound do you hear at the end. And then another really easy one, which you can do anywhere, is a bit like I Spy. You know, can you find something that begins with the sound p or k or m? What can you see in your environment? You know, you can get a collection of toys together, and you can get your child to pick all the toys that begin with a m sound, you know, for example. There's lots and lots of fun games that you can play. And they're easy. You know, a lot of people think that you need to buy resources in order to teach your child something, but actually you can just use what's around you. You can go outside and just spot things in nature. When you're walking around, you can be looking at the road signs, you can be looking at the names of the shops. In the supermarket, you can have a look. There's print everywhere, isn't there? So I think we have to make the most of environmental print as well. But yeah, just very simple things, getting them to pick out objects that start with a certain sound, or tell them a word and asking them what sound is at the beginning, middle, end. Those are really good ways to build up the phonological awareness. Things like print awareness, that's just a simple case of reading with your child. If you have been reading to your child from birth, then they will know this is what a book is. This is how we read a book. In English, we read from left to right. We start at that side. And the letters are representing something. They'll get very interested. If you are regularly reading to your children, I think they will get interested in how they can read themselves. So it's all about trying to instill a love of reading in your child, I think,
I
right?
think
And
that's key.
from reading to them, but also let them see you read. I think often as parents, because there's so much technology, we're quite often reading like on our phones and things.
Actually,
You see, I think it's quite important for them to see you reading a book as well. So sometimes think, I'm going to sit down deliberately in front of my child and read a book. Don't just wait till they're in bed or something. Let them see you actually reading as well. I think that's really important too. Yeah.
So it's two things that are quite important to give the pleasure of reading to our children and to read ourselves, because if we just do one, it's less powerful. Like, for example, my parents, so both, they love books, they were reading all the time, but I guess they didn't manage to give us the love of reading when we were children. So my brother and I didn't really like reading, but I really focused on trying to get my children excited about reading by reading them lots of stories. But yeah, we need to have both.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think in order to get them to love reading, it's important for them to choose what they want to read as well. So, for example, my 11-year-old, he spent a couple of years only reading Beano comics. And I was getting really frustrated. Why won't he read a chapter book, a proper book? And I just kind of let it go, and I just thought, right, as long as he's reading, that's the main thing. And he would literally be reading, like he'd come down in the morning, eating breakfast, he's got his Beano, every spare moment of the day he's just reading his Beano, and I was just waiting, when's he going to pick up a book? And he did eventually. Now he really likes reading chapter books. But I found with my eldest, who's now 13, she never really developed a love of reading, and I think she is in school now. She's the only one that goes to school, and there's a combination of factors for her. She actually did learn to read in school because she went to school for year one. She went to school for 1 year in the UK, and she got taught to read at school, and since then she just absolutely hated reading, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, with my son, I just let him read whatever he wants to read, and now he reads the stuff that I want him to read as well, which is really good.
I think it's a good point that you're making, that we need to sometimes stay back and not try to interfere too much with what our children are reading, because then it becomes like they have less choice. They can't really read what they want to. They're forced to read something else. They have less pleasure. And we, like you said, we need to be patient for them to start exploring other kinds of books as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about getting them to enjoy reading, and if you're forcing them to read, they're not enjoying it, they're not going to have a good relationship with books and reading in the future.
And so you just mentioned that your daughter learned to read in school, but you have also three or four other children, but I guess the youngest one is not reading yet. But have you, and you said we have to adapt to each child. What differences did you have between your different children when you taught them?
Yeah, so with my eldest, I obviously she learned to read in school, and I think that's one of the things that put me off the systematic synthetic phonics, actually, because she was one of the kids that did struggle with that, and I just found it quite tricky trying to get her to like unlearn the rules, when she was just saying everything exactly how it sounded, sounding out all the letters individually, and she really struggled with that, because actually I read somewhere that 75% of English has regular spelling and 25% has irregular. So that means like 1 in 4 words is going to be irregular spelling, which is quite a high number actually. So we need to be mindful of the fact that, you know, children are going to come across a lot of words that are not, you know, represented phonetically, you know, because English is not exactly a phonemic language. It's a morphophonemic language. So the morphology comes into it when we think about English spellings, the morphology, so the meaning of the word, and also the etymology, you know, the history of the word comes a lot into English spelling. And that's really interesting, actually. And I think when children know about the etymology of the word, the history, why it's spelt the way it is, it can actually help them a lot as well. So there's a reading approach called structured word inquiry. I don't know whether you've ever come across it before.
No.
Structured word inquiry, very interesting. So this is all about looking at the etymology of the word in order to help with spelling and understanding. And once you start to do this, spelling actually makes a lot of sense. So for example, if you think of the number 2, it's written TWO. And you think, why has it got a W in it? You know, we don't pronounce that W. Why is it there? But then you think, what other words start with TW? Okay. So you think, oh, twice, twin, 20.
Yeah.
Okay. And then that makes sense because they all represent 2 of something,
Yeah.
right? And then we know, oh, that's why the number 2 starts TWO. Okay. So when we think about that, about the history of the word, about why it's written like that, the spelling actually makes a lot of sense. Okay.
So would you explain that to like a 5 or 6 years old child, or would
Yeah,
it be later?
I think yeah, the age of 6 they can probably start to understand these things. But yeah, I think when you come across the word as you're teaching it, you know, like for example, my daughter who I'm teaching to read at the moment, she hasn't come across this word TWO yet because she's only just starting to like put 3 letter words together.
Yeah.
That's what stage she's at. So she hasn't come across TWO yet. So I
Okay.
expect sometime in the next year she will come across this spelling, and then I will explain it to her. You know, there's lots of things like that where when you actually look at why, you know, the history of it and why it's written as it is, it makes a lot of sense. And you know, I think once children know that, they know that the TW represents 2, they're then going to be able to spell that correctly in the future, you know, if they remember that, you know, that bit.
It's grouping the words together, so it's less we learn one by one. If we learn
Yeah.
one group, it becomes a lot easier.
Yeah. And even things like the morphology, you know, like the endings of the suffixes we put on the end of words. So the past tense ending ed, we can actually say that 3 different ways, right? We can say it as ed, you know, beheaded, you know, that's actually saying the E and the D. Or we can say it as walked, that's a T sound at the end, right?
Yeah.
Or we can say pulled, that's a D sound on the end, right? So we can say D, T, or ed, right? But it's just ed. The spelling is ed, but we say it in 3 different sounds, okay? And children can struggle with this, I think, when they're learning to write. They might want to say, I walked, and then they put a K and a T at the end. But once they know, actually, we need to write ed to represent the past tense, then that will help them, right, to write the ending correctly. Even though they know it's a T sound, they think, no, it's the past tense, I need to write ed, then they should be able to spell it. But obviously they need to have a bit of an understanding of grammar as well, right? Because they need to know what the past tense means.
Yeah, so it's
So
not
this is
straight
what,
at the beginning, but
yeah.
But that's so I like this advice you're giving to sort of give them a way to remember many things at the same time. So like the TW for everything that represents 2, EDs for the past. It can't be right at the beginning, but if we do it little by little, they remember things more easily, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about building on knowledge they already have. You know, you can't give them all the knowledge at the same time, you know. You have to just keep building it. When they come across it, that's the best time, I think, to teach, you know, in the moment. They've come across something, like maybe they're reading or they want to write something. And when you're in that moment and they want to, know how to say it or know how to spell it, then you can just give them, the little lesson about that.
Yeah. Okay. Uh, and so just something that came to mind, but you know the program Alpha Blocks?
Yes.
What's your take on this? What do you like? What do you like less, or what do you think?
Well, I haven't really watched it that much because
Ah,
I'm just a bit like, I don't really like the technology too much, when it
ah,
comes to
okay.
reading and writing. Just because I think, I like my kids to have less screen time.
Yeah.
So it's just like adds an extra level of screen time, which they don't really need. So yeah, I don't know, but from what I know, there's a lot of the blocks and they say their sounds and then they blend together and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is that what
Yeah.
it is? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it can work well for some children. I mean, I would imagine they use systematic synthetic phonic approach.
Yeah, from what
Be-
you explained before,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. So I think if it's something that helps your child, then there's no reason why you shouldn't use it. I think it's all about finding what works for your child.
Yeah, thank you. And so just to come back on my previous question, so what are some of the adaptations you had to do between one sibling and the other when you're teaching them to read and write?
So yeah, they've all really learned the same way, apart from my eldest who learned by systematic synthetic phonics in school. The other two, the two boys in the middle, they have learned the same way. So from doing phonological awareness activities, then learning the alphabet, and then by going, by these books, Peter and Jane
Yeah,
books. And then my youngest at the moment, she is on the stage where she's kind of finished learning the alphabet and she's starting to put 3-letter words together. And once she can do that, then I'm going to be moving on to these books as well with her. So yeah, I've done them all the same way really, and it works well for my kids. So I'm just going to keep doing that method.
okay. Okay, thank you. And now I was wondering if you had any recommendation of resources. So you have shown this book. Is there anything else that would be good for parents to know that if they want to teach their children to read, or if they want just to practice or reinforce things that they know already, they can go to these resources?
Yeah, I don't know whether you've come across this book, but this is quite interesting as well.
Ah,
So it's a linguistic approach to reading. And this is a bit different because it's so the guy who came up with it, an American linguist called Leonard Bloomfield, he actually thought that children should learn to read by looking at the differences between the shapes of the letters
yeah.
rather than the sounds. So it's quite interesting anyway. But what I quite like about it is it's just got lots of practice in. So can you see how you just have, what have we got here? We've got king, ring, sing, wing. So I like these word lists in it because you can get the child seeing that, just change one letter, changes the word. So it's kind of practicing kind of rhyming and stuff.
Oh,
I
yeah.
quite like this about this book, you know. So I think that's just like another good thing for practicing,
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, it's just got lots of lists and then short passages to read based on, the knowledge that the kids learned. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
This is what I have literally just brought this week for my kids. Okay. It's called Excavating English. And this is about the history of the English language, actually. So this is about teaching them the, like we were talking about with the structured word inquiry, why words are spelt the way they are. It's because of the history about the morphology of the word. So I'm really looking forward to doing this with my kids, actually, because this is going to be really helping them, I think, with their reading and writing and understanding the spelling system. Yeah.
Thank you very much. If you could just send me after the title, the link, that would be great so I can add them to the description.
Yeah, definitely.
And what I had a question I forgot.
I'll just say as well,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
not really a fan of the Oxford reading books. You know, the ones they do in the school with for the phonics. It's called
Um,
Oxford Reading Tree, Biff, Chip and Kipper. Are you familiar with those books?
Okay. Why don't you like it?
I just think the stories are a bit odd. They're not as
Ah,
interesting for kids. And yeah, I prefer the stories with these because they're just very like everyday sorts of story. Like they will go
yeah, yeah,
shopping and
yeah,
they'll go to the beach. And I think that's the kind of things that children are going to be doing in their everyday life. So it kind of makes more sense to them. But yeah, I'm not really a fan of those. So I would say if your child does not like reading the Oxford Reading Tree books that they get from school, there's no harm in going out to the library, for example, and finding some books that they are more interested in.
yeah. Because I feel so. So my sons had to read them as well, but the story is really made around the sounds they're trying to teach the children. So, like you said, the story is not always very interesting, etc. But it's really focused on just certain sounds. But so you think it's better to have some sounds that they can recognize, etc., but still leave some parts where they can learn them from the context. Is that what
Yeah,
you
yeah,
mean?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I remember my question. It was between the balance of reading and writing. So do you teach both at the same time, or do you start more by focusing on one skill with a bit of the other and then compensate, or how do you balance reading and writing?
Well, writing's quite interesting because you find that very young children, they like to mark make, which is like the precursor to writing. Okay. So I think even from a very young age, children are very motivated to write, but not necessarily write, words as we see it, but they love to make the marks. If you're reading to them and they know what writing is, they will be kind of making lots of lines on the page to kind of look like writing. And I think it's very good for them to be able to explore that without necessarily having the parent saying you're doing it wrong, you should do it this way. So I think letting
Mm.
them have fun with kind of the mark making and things like that is really good. I think there are some people, I think Montessori actually talks about teaching writing even before reading, which is quite interesting. So there are different methods that different people promote. But for me, I have found that my kids don't like to write a lot, until they're quite a lot older. So I would say we shouldn't be forcing them to write right at the beginning. Like they might like to write, one word, and you can be doing that when you're doing like phonological awareness. Once they know the letters, you can say to them, write the word cat, you know, and see if they can do it. They find that kind of thing fun. But I think once they know how to do it, it's not just about we need to be doing writing practice every day. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
I think it's more important that they come to enjoy writing. And I think one way that you can get them to enjoy writing when they're very young is by making them understand that what they say is important. Okay. So, sometimes they might say something and you think, oh, that was really clever. I'm just going to write that down because I want to remember what you said, you know, or help them if they want to like tell a little story and you can say, oh, let me just write down your story. So I think at the beginning, you can be doing a lot of writing for them and
yeah,
making them understand that what they say is important. And that is kind of a precursor of them writing longer, page long narrations when they're older. Do you see what I mean?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like the fact that you're saying that so basically waiting for them to be ready. So I guess at the beginning, like you said, they want to write cat or different words because it's like when they have just learned to master this skill, it's exciting for them. After they've passed this phase, they're less excited. It becomes more of a choice, especially if we ask them to write long text. And once they're more confident, and they can see that they can actually write, I guess, quite easily, they can then start pushing themselves again to write more.
Yeah, because I think, with writing, it's a bit different because it's like quite often you are having to come up with it yourself, right? So you need to build up that skill of them being able to tell a narration,
Yeah,
and get them quite confident in that. So we do a lot of oral narration before my kids do written narration. Okay. So we do a lot of in our homeschool, this is how we learn basically. We'll get books and I'll read maybe a couple of paragraphs or a page and I'll ask them to narrate back the story to me orally. So they just tell me the story. And
Yeah,
it's not until they're older that I would expect them to write it down, you know. But sometimes they, you know, when they're younger, maybe like 6, 7, 8, they will want to write a couple of sentences down, you know. But I don't push it. I'm more interested in them getting up those speaking skills, you know,
yeah,
able to like form grammatically correct sentences when they're speaking and using good vocabulary and things like that, and just the memory skill actually of paying attention and remembering the text.
yeah,
And writing just comes a lot later, I think, for me. So
yeah,
it's all about letting them have fun and explore with writing, but not pushing them too much until they're ready.
yeah. Thank you very much. That's a very important thing to remember. Thank you. And yeah, so just to, because we're coming close to the end, I was wondering if there were anything we haven't covered yet that you think is important for parents to know when they're teaching the children to read and write in
Yeah,
English.
I think, you know, keep in mind that comprehension is really important as well, you know. It's not just about the ability to read the words, it's about your child's understanding. So you really need to be paying attention to, are they able to understand the text as well? And I would say the school approach of giving them comprehension questions is not a very good way to do this. Is really quite boring. You know, when they read like a page and then they have to answer questions about it, this is very boring for them. It's a lot more better to it's a lot better to do what I said previously about the narration.
Yeah,
Ask them to tell it back to you. Ask them what, you know, was there something they found interesting about that? Which point did they find interesting? What did they think about this character doing that or something? You know, have a conversation, have a discussion with it, rather
yeah,
than get them to like just answer questions, because that can be very dull and boring. You know, I think having discussions about books is one of the best things, you know, read from books, read all together, have discussions about it. It's a great way for kids to learn, and it's a great way for you to get an understanding about what they have comprehended from the text as well.
yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you for all these little tips and insights into teaching our children to read and write in English, because it's not an easy language. And also I want to thank you because you are giving away a space on one of your, a place, sorry, a place on one of your courses or parenting, what to say, what's the
Coaching.
word? Coaching, thank you.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk to us a bit about what they are?
Yeah. So as we said right at the beginning, I'm a speech and language therapist, and I have created a number of courses, online parenting courses actually for parents. So I have a course called Raising Talkers, and that's for parents of 0 to 5-year-olds who want to become empowered with the knowledge to boost their child's language skills. So either maybe they have a late talker and they want to try and get them talking, or maybe it's, you know, they have a baby and they want to discover the best way to communicate in order to prevent them becoming a late talker, in order to get them talking, you know, really well. So that's the Raising Talkers course. And then I also have a course called Clear Speech, which is specifically for parents of children with speech sound difficulties. So
Okay.
that's those where they say a sound wrong or they get sounds mixed up. Which is, you know, we discussed that at the beginning. It's very important for learning to read. And then the other course I have is Emergent Literacy. So this is for parents of young children before they start teaching their kids to read and write. It talks all about, you know, those pre-literacy skills, lots of games and activities, how the brain reads, lots of motivation, and how to get started basically on teaching kids to read and write. So they're the 3 courses. And then obviously I do coaching as well for bilingual families who want to talk about creating a language plan for their family and the best way to do that. And I do homeschool coaching as well for homeschool families. So yeah, you've got quite a lot of options if you win
Yeah.
the giveaway.
Thank you very much. And for those of you who are interested, so I remind you the link, but it's I put it in the description. It's in the program. So if you go to Veronika's page, you see different red gift icons. If you click on it, you've gone to a Google form where you can choose all the giveaways you want to enter. And to enter it, you just need to comment on this video, ask questions, or comment on this video. So thank you very much for your time, and yeah, have a nice weekend.
Thank you very much. It's been really lovely to talk to you, and I hope everyone enjoys the interview and gets a lot out of it.
I'm sure they will. Thank you.